Gilles de Rais was once the most celebrated war hero in France, fighting alongside Joan of Arc and earning the respect of kings. By 1440, this same man would confess to torturing and murdering over 140 children, using a device called the iron chair. But Gilles wasn't born a monster. He was created by a psychological principle so dangerous that understanding it might be the only way to recognize when you're becoming someone you never intended to be. What destroyed Gilles de Rais reveals the most terrifying truth about human nature. Cruelty doesn't happen overnight. It escalates in tiny steps until normal people commit unthinkable acts. And this escalation is happening around you right now. Orleans, France, 1429. Gilles de Rais was everything medieval society admired, a brilliant military strategist, the youngest marshal of France in history, and Joan of Arc's most trusted companion. Contemporary accounts describe him as deeply religious, generous to the poor, and devoted to protecting the innocent. Gilles wasn't just wealthy and powerful, he was genuinely good. But Gilles had one fatal flaw: he needed constant stimulation to feel alive. Victory in battle, the adoration of crowds, the rush of danger, nothing else satisfied him. When the 100 Years' War ended and Joan of Arc was executed, Gilles faced something he'd never experienced: boredom. And boredom, for someone addicted to intensity, becomes a psychological poison. Gilles began hosting elaborate theatrical performances at his castle, spending his vast fortune on increasingly extravagant spectacles. But even this wasn't enough. He turned to alchemy and black magic, seeking thrills in forbidden knowledge. Each new transgression felt justified because it was just slightly more extreme than the last. Gilles was experiencing what psychologists now call escalation conditioning, and he had no idea where it would lead. Modern psychology has identified the exact mechanism that transformed Gilles de Rais from hero to monster, and it's called moral disengagement through graduated escalation. Albert Bandura's research shows that people don't suddenly become cruel. They take small steps across moral boundaries until those boundaries disappear entirely. Here's how escalation conditioning works. Each transgression makes the next one feel normal by comparison. Gilles started by killing animals in his alchemical experiments, disturbing but not murderous. Then he graduated to witnessing executions for pleasure, still legal, just twisted. Each step felt like a small progression from the previous one, never a massive leap into evil. Brain imaging shows that repeated exposure to violence literally rewires the amygdala's threat response. What once triggered revulsion becomes merely interesting, then exciting, then necessary for arousal. Gilles' brain was adapting to require increasingly intense stimulation, and conventional sources of excitement no longer worked. The iron chair became Gilles' ultimate escalation tool. Unlike quick execution methods, it allowed him to control the pace and intensity of suffering, creating a customizable experience that could be adjusted based on his psychological needs. The chair wasn't just a torture device. It was an addiction management system for someone whose brain required ever-increasing levels of stimulation. Gilles de Rais had constructed what he called his laboratories, a chamber containing the iron chair and other devices designed for prolonged suffering. Court records describe how Gilles would spend hours with his victims, not in rage or passion, but with the focused attention of someone conducting scientific experiments. Gilles didn't torture randomly. He followed escalating patterns. He began each session with psychological terror, describing what would happen while the victim was still unharmed. Then came restraint in the iron chair, followed by heated metal application, escalating to more severe methods as his arousal demanded. Each session had to surpass the previous one to achieve the same psychological effect. But his confession reveals the most chilling aspect of escalation conditioning. He genuinely believed his actions were justified because each individual step had felt reasonable compared to the previous one. In Gilles' mind, he hadn't become a monster. He had simply followed a logical progression. Gilles de Rais was executed in 1440, but his case became the foundation for understanding how good people transform into perpetrators of unthinkable cruelty. His escalation pattern, boredom, transgression, adaptation, escalation, has been replicated countless times throughout history by people who started with the best intentions. Every principle that transformed Gilles de Rais operates in modern contexts, but disguised as normal progression. From workplace harassment to political extremism, to online radicalization, escalation conditioning is creating modern monsters who genuinely believe their behavior is justified. Social media algorithms deliberately use Gilles' escalation pattern to increase engagement. They start with mildly provocative content, then gradually increase emotional intensity until users are consuming and sharing material they would have found repulsive months earlier. The platform profits from your escalating outrage exactly like Gilles profited from escalating cruelty. Corporate cultures often replicate Gilles' pattern through gradual boundary erosion. It starts with small ethical compromises, mighty as padding expense reports, misleading customers slightly. Each transgression makes the next feel normal until employees are engaging in behaviors that would have horrified their younger selves. The iron chair becomes the corner office. Hate groups use Gilles' exact escalation protocol. Start with legitimate grievances, gradually introduce more extreme viewpoints, normalize increasing levels of dehumanization until violence feels like logical progression. Each step feels justified because it's only slightly worse than the previous one. The key to avoiding Gilles' fate is recognizing escalation in real time. Any situation that requires you to gradually compromise your values, justify increasingly questionable behavior, or adapt to rising levels of intensity is using his psychological protocol. The iron chair isn't always made of metal, sometimes it's made of small compromises that add up to complete moral destruction. He never recognized that each small step toward cruelty was a choice that made the next choice easier. But understanding Gilles' escalation gives you something he never had, the ability to recognize when you're on the same path. Robert Greene warns about the corruption of power, but Gilles' story reveals something more personal. The corruption happens gradually, through small compromises that feel reasonable in isolation. The moment you start justifying behavior you once found unacceptable, you've taken your first step toward Gilles' iron chair. In the comments, share a time when you caught yourself escalating my tez, maybe in an argument, at work, or online. What made you recognize the pattern and step back? Your awareness could help someone else avoid Gilles' fate. Hit subscribe because we're exposing the psychology behind history's darkest transformations and how those same mechanisms target your mind today. Every story reveals another way people become monsters, and every understanding gives you more power to stay human. Gilles de Rais started as a hero and ended as a monster because he never learned to recognize escalation. You know better. Use that knowledge before it's too late. The iron chair taught Gilles that cruelty could escalate infinitely. Make sure you never forget that kindness can escalate too.